The city was still half asleep when Darnell Jones stepped off the early train. The sidewalks were wet with dew, reflecting the purple hue of the streetlights. A lone cab sped past as he adjusted the strap on his old canvas duffel and headed toward the tower that ruled the skyline, Grantwell and Pierce Financial Group. 47 stories of glass, ambition, and people who thought kindness was a tax. It was 5:02 a.m. Inside, the lobby gleamed with Italian marble and golden fixtures. Music played softly through hidden speakers. Vivaldi, maybe. Darnell moved through the rotating doors like a shadow. He nodded to the overnight security guard, Rick, who barely looked up from his phone. "Morning," Darnell offered. Rick grunted, not even lifting his coffee. Darnell didn't take it personal. He never did. Being invisible was part of the job. He made his way to the supply closet tucked behind the executive break room. His name wasn't on the door, it never had been, but everyone knew the space was his. Inside were shelves of industrial cleaner, mop heads, and a decades-old radio that only played jazz. He slid into his dark green uniform, smoothing the patch over his heart. D. Jones, Facilities. Facilities. The word sounded sterile, lifeless. It didn't capture who he was. Didn't mention that he memorized every floor plan, every HVAC panel, every plumbing quirk of the building. Didn't say that when the building's water system failed last winter, it was Darnell who fixed it before sunrise. No applause, no bonus. Just a sticky note that read, "Thanks, Meggemt." By 5:30 a.m., he was working the 12th floor, sweeping, dusting, emptying bins with practiced grace. He paused at a glass office. Inside, rows of awards, a photo of a yacht, and a whiteboard with bold, underlined words, "Winners think big." He chuckled softly, then bent to pick up a granola bar wrapper someone left behind. At 6:45 a.m., the day staff began trickling in. High heels clicked, laptops zipped open. The baristas in the lobby cafe fired up espresso machines. An intern, pale, rushed, rounded the corner with a donut in one hand and coffee in the other. He bumped into Darnell. "Watch it, man." The kid paused, looked Darnell over, and corrected himself. "Oh, sorry, didn't see you." Darnell gave a slight nod and stepped aside. This was the rhythm, people buzzing around him like bees to the queen, all of them so sure of their place, their pedigree. And Darnell? He floated on the margins, unbothered but observant. He wasn't nosy. He was just aware. He knew Mr. Langley on 17 had been drinking more, smelled it in the trash. Knew that Mrs. Bloom from HR cried in the fourth stall every Wednesday at 2:17 p.m. Knew the CEO's assistant left early on Fridays to care for her son, even though she pretended it was a yoga thing. They thought no one noticed, but Darnell saw everything. At 8:12 a.m., he stepped into the executive conference room to wipe down the table before a meeting. Half the chairs were already taken. Someone muttered, "Here comes the janitor, great. Can't wait to smell bleach and Pine Sol during my quarterly pitch." A few chuckled. Not loudly, but enough. Darnell didn't react. He sprayed, he wiped. He collected half-drunk lattes and lipstick-smudged napkins. One man looked at him like he was moving furniture. "You missed a spot," he said with a smirk, pointing to a crumb. Darnell cleaned the spot. "You're welcome," he replied softly. They didn't hear him. His lunch break came at 11 a.m. He took it in the boiler room, not because he had to, but because it was quiet. He sat on an upturned bucket, opened a thermos of black coffee, and pulled out a book, The Count of Monte Cristo. It was his third time reading it. He liked the part where the man in rags becomes the richest, most feared figure in the city, without ever raising his voice. On the inside of his locker was a photo, faded, torn. His mother stood in front of a shuttered bookstore, arms wide like she was blessing it. "Jones Books," the sign had read, "where words come to life." She never got to open it. She passed before Darnell could save enough. He tried to keep the dream alive, even opened a tiny shop downtown, but rent went up, foot traffic went down. His silent business partner took the last of their savings. Now, that dream lived only in his memory, and on that photo. People thought Darnell had no ambition, that he scrubbed floors because he lacked drive, but he had more ambition than anyone in that building. He was just patient, and he knew something they didn't. When you're underestimated, people show you who they really are. Sundays were different. The city slowed down, traffic thinned, and for a few quiet hours, even the towers of Grantwell and Pierce looked less intimidating. That morning, Darnell took the long route through the south side, past the basketball courts where he used to play pickup games as a teenager, past the corner store where his mother would send him for canned peaches and cornbread mix. He stopped outside a rusted gate and looked up at an aging brick building with chipped red paint, the Isaiah Literacy Center. He volunteered there every weekend, quietly, anonymously. He never asked for thanks, never gave his last name. To the kids, he was just Mr. D, the one who brought boxes of books and fixed the jammed copier. The one who always had an extra sandwich or a warm hoodie when winter crept in. Inside, the energy buzzed. Kids darted between bookshelves giggling. A pair of volunteers tried to keep order, but it was like herding lightning. In the back, Miss Alberta, the director, waved him over. "You're back. Thank God. Printer's been jamming again." Darnell smiled. "Let me guess. Someone fed it fruit snacks?" 3 times. He got to work. As he knelt near the printer, a little girl with big glasses and braids tugged on his sleeve. "Mister, are you a teacher?" He smiled. "Not anymore, but I used to be something like one." She tilted her head. "Why'd you stop?" He hesitated. That question always hit harder than expected. "Sometimes life has different plans, but I still love stories. I still love helping." She nodded thoughtfully. "I'm gonna be a writer. Maybe you can read my book someday." "I'd like that very much," he said, voice warm. Darnell had once imagined a life full of stories. He didn't grow up wealthy, but his mother, Margaret Jones, was a woman of deep wisdom and fierce love. She raised him on library cards and poetry, not pity. He still remembered the nights they'd stay up late, her reading from Baldwin or Maya Angelou by candlelight when the lights were cut. She used to say, "Words are power, baby. They build nations. They break chains. They save souls." That bookstore was supposed to be their legacy. Jones Books, where words come to life. They had rented a small space near 79th and State Street. It had old wooden shelves, crooked tile floors, and a bell that chimed every time the door opened. They sold local authors, black literature, banned books, and used classics. They hosted open mic nights, reading circles for kids, and poetry slams with juice and cookies. But then came the storm, a rent hike, a water leak no one would fix, a grant that fell through, and finally, her illness. He sold the inventory to pay for her treatments. The store closed. She died 3 months later. He never reopened. That was the story his sister Tasha never fully knew. She was 5 years younger, sharp, ambitious, unapologetic. While Darnell tried to save the store, she was finishing law school. He didn't tell her everything, didn't want her to worry, didn't want her to think he'd failed. But the silence built a wall between them. Later that day, he sat with her at a diner, halfway between her office and the neighborhood they grew up in. They met there every other Sunday for lunch, out of obligation more than tradition. Tasha arrived 10 minutes late, as always. Hair in tight curls, blazer crisp, phone buzzing nonstop. She slid into the booth. "Sorry, deposition ran long. How's the building treating you? Still cleaning toilets for billionaires?" He chuckled softly. "Still fixing what they break." "You could do better, Dee," she said, sipping her latte. "You're the smartest person I know, but you let life just pass you by." You think I like being a janitor? He asked, eyebrows raised. She paused. I think you got comfortable. Mama raised us to chase more. He looked out the window. And I'm still chasing, just not in the same way. Tasha sighed. I just don't want you to be forgotten. He turned back to her, voice steady. Sometimes being forgotten gives you space to build in peace. They didn't talk much after that. She paid the bill. He left the tip. As they parted ways, she hugged him a little tighter than usual. Call me if you need anything, all right? Always. Back home, he climbed the narrow stairs of his old building and entered his studio. The light flickered when he flipped the switch. He stood by the window and looked out over the city skyline, the same skyline that seemed unreachable most days. Then he opened the drawer. Inside was a sealed envelope. On it, his mother's handwriting. For when you feel like giving up. He hadn't opened it. Not yet. Maybe one day, but not tonight. Because tomorrow would be just another Monday. Or so he thought. Monday mornings were always the worst. Not because of the early hours or the icy floors. Not even because he had to scrub dried espresso from the corners of the elevator. But because Monday mornings made people meaner. Something about shaking off their weekend egos and slipping back into their tailored insecurities made everyone crueler, sharper, more dismissive. And that day was no different. Darnell had just finished mopping the hallway near the trading floor when Cynthia, the longtime HR director, strutted by in 6-inch heels and a tailored navy dress. She barely slowed her pace. You missed a spot, Darnell, she said, pointing at a scuff mark by the corner. Just finished there, ma'am. It's drying. Well, it's not good enough. She waved a hand and walked off. Her assistant, tagging behind her, gave Darnell a pitying smile. He didn't react. He bent down, ran the mop over the same spot again, and moved on. At 9:14 a.m., Darnell was called to conference room B. The email read, Urgent, spill cleanup, pre-investor meeting. When he arrived, the room was full of execs. No spill, just leftover donuts, bagel crumbs, and a single water bottle tipped over onto a tablecloth. A young associate named Trent sat with his legs up, scrolling his phone. Took you long enough, Trent muttered without looking up. We've got people flying in. Can't have this place smelling like mop water, you know? Darnell cleaned in silence. Then the insult landed. Hey, Darnell, what's your 5-year plan? Gonna upgrade from floors to windows? Chuckles echoed around the room. Maybe he'll open a candle company. Essence of Windex. More laughter. Darnell tightened his grip on the trash bag, but he said nothing. After the room cleared, Darnell stood there for a long moment. He looked at the whiteboard where someone had written in bold letters, Elevate, Dominate, Lead. He picked up the eraser, wiped the words away, and walked out. By lunchtime, the ache in his knees was spreading to his lower back, but there was still the basement storage to clean. He was halfway through dragging a vacuum hose up the stairwell when Mr. Halverson, his landlord, called. He let it go to voicemail. Then the second call came, and the third. He finally answered. You're late, Darnell. I dropped off a check on Friday. Check bounced. You got 48 hours or I'm changing locks. That can't be right. I don't care if it's right. Pay it or get out. Click. Darnell stood in the stairwell, holding the phone against his ear long after the call ended. He went through the rest of the day on autopilot. He cleaned. He nodded. He smiled politely when someone dropped an empty cup and called him boss as a joke. He didn't have the energy to even be angry. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the skyline, casting gold across the windows of the city, Darnell sat on a cold bench outside Marvin's Market, a little corner store near his apartment. He had $4.82 in his pocket. He thought about buying eggs, or maybe a frozen meal. But inside, something felt too heavy. Like if he went home and sat in that silence again, something in him would break. He walked into the store. The clerk, a bearded man named Yusuf, smiled. "Evening, Mr. D. Long day?" Darnell just nodded. He wandered to the back, past the cooler, and stared at the scratch-off tickets behind the counter. One caught his eye. "Mega fortune, $2 billion jackpot." He shook his head. What was the point? But something inside, maybe bitterness, maybe fate, nudged him. "Give me one of the mega fortunes," he said. Yusuf raised an eyebrow. "Didn't have you pegged as the gambling type." "Me neither." He walked home with the ticket folded in half in his pocket, like a receipt from a life he couldn't afford. The hallway in his building smelled like cigarette smoke and cheap cologne. He climbed the stairs slower than usual. Inside, his apartment was quiet. The fridge buzzed louder than the traffic outside. The heater clicked, but didn't blow warm. He dropped his bag by the door, set the ticket on the table, and made himself a glass of tap water. Then he sat. For 2 hours, he stared at the ticket. Didn't scratch it. Didn't move. He just thought about his mother, about the bookstore, about how far he had drifted from the dream. Then he reached into the drawer and pulled out a dime. He scratched slowly, like peeling paint from an old memory. First number, second, third. His hand stopped. His breath caught. He checked the numbers again, then again. He dropped the ticket and laughed, just once. A single hollow laugh that echoed through the tiny apartment like a warning shot to the universe. "No one's going to believe this," he whispered. Outside, the city pulsed and glittered like nothing had changed. But for Darnell Jones, everything had. Darnell didn't sleep that night. Not a second. He sat in the glow of his single table lamp, staring at the winning ticket as if it might vanish. The numbers were burned into his brain now. He'd memorized them like scripture. His mother would have called it a miracle. Tasha would have called it luck. The people at Grantwell and Pierce would never call it anything, because they'd never imagine he could win. But Darnell didn't feel rich, not yet. What he felt was free. By sunrise, he was at the lottery office, dressed in the same faded hoodie and work boots he always wore. He didn't care who stared. The security guard told him to wait in a private room. A man in a blue suit with kind eyes and trembling hands entered with a folder labeled $2 billion. Claimant Jones, D. Everything after that was a blur. Disclaimers, tax schedules, security protocols, lawyers, banks, wire transfers. He opted for the lump sum. He didn't care about the penalties. He wasn't trying to stretch it out over 20 years. He needed power, now, and he needed to disappear. By 5 p.m., he was gone. The next morning at Grantwell and Pierce, there was a note taped to the janitor closet door. Darnell quit, didn't say why. Rick, security. No one looked twice. No send-off. No, "we'll miss you." Just another ghost leaving the building. But while Darnell was gone in body, he was more present than ever. He had hired a private lawyer named Candace, a sharp black woman with a photographic memory and a bite that could slice steel. He told her everything he wanted. "I don't want to be seen. I want to own, quietly, permanently, efficiently." Within 45 days, they'd set up 3 shell companies, 2 offshore trusts, 1 Delaware corporation called Horizon Gray Holdings, and a nonprofit fund registered under his mother's name, the Margaret Legacy Foundation. The first purchases were personal. He bought back the old bookstore property, quietly, paid off Miss Patty's medical debt, anonymously, bought his building, gave the tenants $0 leases, and fixed the plumbing no one else had touched in 12 years. Then came the bigger moves. He started acquiring silent shares in Grantwell and Pierce. Not directly, never directly. He did it through layers of investor proxies and holding companies. Candace orchestrated it like a maestro conducting a private symphony of leverage. Every week, Luis, the new janitor, would find an unmarked envelope in his locker. Sometimes it was a check. Sometimes it was a letter of encouragement. Once it was tuition for his daughter's daycare. He never figured out where it came from. He just called it God money. And every time he prayed, he mentioned the stranger blessing his life. Meanwhile, the board at Grantwell and Pierce started noticing shifts. Unknown shareholders attending calls, proxy votes they couldn't track, an audit request for expenses long buried, a quiet reshuffling of corporate bylaws. Cynthia in HR started losing sleep. Mr. Drayton, the CEO, started drinking more. And Darnell, he traveled, not for luxury, not to flash money. He went to Tulsa, to Harlem, to Selma, to Montgomery. He walked the streets his mother once dreamed of seeing. He funded 8 community libraries, bought 5 school buses for underfunded districts, and paid to restore 3 jazz clubs on the verge of collapse. But still, he told no one, not even Tasha. That's when the twist came. Tasha had been receiving strange mail, newspaper clippings, envelopes with no return address, donations made in her name. She thought it was a scam, but something about the handwriting on one of the donation forms stopped her cold. It looked like his, Darnell. She hired a friend in finance to look into Horizon Gray Holdings. What she found stunned her. An anonymous board seat, millions moving in and out, acquisitions, and a quiet purchase of Grantwell and Pierce stock. This doesn't make sense, she told herself. Darnell couldn't. She didn't call him, not yet, but she started watching the news more carefully. Meanwhile, Candace updated Darnell on the takeover status. We've passed 46% control. Just a few more blocks of shares, and you'll be the majority. Good, Darnell said. I don't want fireworks. I want them to feel it when it's too late to stop it. Candace smiled. You want revenge? He shook his head. I want recognition. And after that, maybe a little peace. That same day, Darnell wrote a letter to himself. He slid it into the envelope his mother had written before she died. Then he sealed it again. Soon, he whispered, almost there. The email went out to every employee of Grantwell and Pierce. Mandatory attendance, annual founders gala, dress code, formal black tie. Every year, it was the same self-congratulatory circus. Crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, speeches about excellence and vision and winning mindsets. But this year, something was different. The board was buzzing with rumors. New money, new power, and the biggest elephant in the room. Who owns us now? No one had answers, only whispers. Meanwhile, across the city in her sleek downtown condo, Tasha Jones stared at her laptop screen. The spreadsheet glowed in the dim light of her kitchen. Horizon Gray Holdings, 46.7% ownership of Grantwell and Pierce, anonymous trust fund movements, scholarship donations in neighborhoods no one invested in. She sipped her wine, trying to piece it together. Could it really be Darnell? The same man she teased for being too passive? The same brother she thought had given up? Her gut said yes. Her mind screamed no. She pulled out her phone, scrolled to his name, hovered over call. Instead, she clicked on a news link. The headline read, Unknown investor shakes up Grantwell and Pierce. Layoffs expected. Leadership changes imminent. Tasha sat back in her chair. If it was Darnell, what was he planning? What would he do to the people who mocked him for years? And worse, what if he forgot who he really was? Meanwhile, Darnell sat in the corner booth of a dimly lit diner, 3 blocks from the old bookstore lot. Across from him, Candace laid out final plans like a general before battle. They're nervous. Board members are leaking gossip to the press. Drayton's trying to rally votes, but it's too late. You'll have full control within days. Darnell stirred his coffee. Good. And the gala? Security's tight. Media's limited. You'll enter as Mr. D. Gray, your holding company's legal face. No one will recognize you until you want them to. He nodded slowly. I don't want a spectacle. I just want to speak. Candace studied him carefully. You sure you want to do this? You're not just buying a company. You're confronting the people who treated you like you were invisible. He smiled thinly. They saw a janitor. They never saw the man cleaning up after their messes. It's time they meet him. Over the next 48 hours, the city prepared. Tasha made a decision. She wasn't going to sit back and watch her brother turn into a ghost billionaire. She would go to the gala herself. If Darnell really was behind all this, she had to see it with her own eyes. Friday night arrived like a slow drum beat. The Grantwell ballroom glittered under 1,000 tiny lights. Black cars lined the curb. Men in tuxedos, women in silk gowns. Laughter floated through the air like champagne bubbles. Inside, Cynthia smiled tightly, working the room like a shark among guppies. Mr. Drayton rehearsed his speech by the open bar. Every face wore the same mask: confidence, control. But underneath, panic, because they all knew something was coming, and none of them could stop it. Near the back of the room, Luis, the young janitor Darnell had been helping anonymously, cleaned glasses off the buffet tables. He didn't belong there, but he stayed close. Something told him tonight was going to be different. At 7:45 p.m., the music lowered. A hush fell over the crowd. The event coordinator tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is historic. We welcome our new principal investor, the visionary leader behind Horizon Gray Holdings. Doors swung open. All heads turned. A man in a sharply tailored black suit stepped through the entryway. No entourage, no fanfare, just presence. Some thought he looked familiar, but no one could place him. Tasha, standing by the far wall, dropped her glass. Her heart hammered in her chest. It was him, Darnell, her brother, but not the man she remembered. This Darnell moved like someone who had nothing left to prove. The room stiffened with polite applause. Mr. Drayton's smile froze mid-lip. Cynthia's drink trembled slightly in her hand. Luis watched in awe, his gut confirming what he somehow already knew. Darnell took the microphone, paused, scanned the sea of expensive suits and shallow smiles, and then he spoke, but not like a man who came to gloat. He spoke like a man burying the past and planting a flag for the future. The ballroom was dead silent. You could hear the faint buzz of the overhead lights, the clink of a single fork dropped in the back. Hundreds of people stared at Darnell Jones, the man they thought they'd never have to notice, the man whose name they never bothered to learn. Now, they hung on his every breath. Darnell adjusted the microphone slightly, not for effect, simply because he wanted to be heard, clearly. Most of you don't know me, he said, his voice calm, rich with quiet authority. Or, if you did, you chose to forget. A few nervous titters, quickly swallowed, he continued. I used to clean these floors, pick up your crumbs, scrub your mistakes off glass windows so you could pretend everything was perfect. Several executives shifted uncomfortably. I heard your jokes, I carried your trash, and I learned something important. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle like dust after an earthquake. The true measure of a person isn't how they treat those they think are powerful. It's how they treat the ones they believe can do nothing for them. No applause, no gasps, just a heavy, suffocating realization. He was right, and every one of them knew it. Mr. Drayton, standing near the center of the room, crossed his arms tightly. Cynthia tried to smile, tried to appear gracious, but her mouth twitched at the corners. Even Luis, standing quietly near the service entrance, held his breath. Darnell smiled faintly. You see, I didn't disappear to get revenge. I disappeared to rebuild. Not to tear down, but to build something stronger than arrogance. He turned slightly toward the giant screen behind him. You all chase success, chase money, Chase names you think will make you important. The screen flickered to life, not with stock portfolios, not with brand logos, but with faces. A teacher whose after-school program was saved by an anonymous donor. A single father who received a scholarship for his daughter. A community center reopening after being closed for 5 years. Darnell's voice softened. Every one of these people you overlooked are the foundation for the future you'll now answer to. Someone whispered near the front. A woman dabbed her eyes discreetly. Tasha, watching from the far wall, felt her throat tighten. She hadn't known. She hadn't seen him, really seen him, in years. Maybe she never had. Darnell's tone sharpened. Not loud, but surgical. Effective immediately, Horizon Gray Holdings is assuming full management control of Grantwell and Pierce. There will be changes. Murmurs rippled like an electric current. Departments will be audited. Community investment will become a cornerstone, not a tax write-off. Leadership will be evaluated, not by tenure or title, but by character. He let that sink in. And as for certain members of this firm, his gaze found Cynthia. It didn't waver. Your services are no longer required. A choked gasp escaped her, but she couldn't move, couldn't speak, only nod. A small, defeated, pitiful nod. Lastly, Darnell said, voice steady, to those who treated the unseen like they were unworthy. He looked out over the sea of shocked, frozen faces. Let tonight be a reminder. The ground you walk on, the floors you pretend not to notice, are built by hands you dismiss. Another pause. And sometimes those hands own everything. He set down the microphone. No mic drop, no swagger, just finality. The ballroom remained frozen, caught between humiliation and awe. Then came the applause. It started slow, a single clap, then two, then a rising, roaring sound as dozens, no, hundreds, of people realized they were witnessing something larger than themselves. Even some of the good ones, the overlooked assistants, the interns, the mailroom clerks, clapped with tears in their eyes. Not for money, not for power, but for justice, for recognition long, long overdue. Darnell stepped down from the stage. He didn't rush, didn't look for approval. He simply moved, with the quiet grace of a man who finally reclaimed what was always his. At the far end of the ballroom, Tasha stood frozen, eyes wide, heart pounding. When he passed her, he slowed. They locked eyes. So much said in a glance: pride, pain, love, apology. She whispered, too low for anyone else to hear, "I'm sorry." Darnell gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, "Me too." And then he moved on. Behind him, the pillars of an old world crumbled. Ahead of him, a new world waited. One he would build, not from rage, but from legacy. The ballroom emptied slowly, like a sinking ship. People slipped away in small clusters, heads bowed, voices hushed, each of them carrying the weight of what had just happened. The air that had once been thick with champagne and self-importance now hung heavy with something else: humility. Cynthia was nowhere to be seen. Mr. Drayton stood near the open bar, staring blankly into his whiskey glass. The remaining board members huddled near the exits, whispering furiously but too afraid to approach the man who now owned them all. Darnell stood by a side door, quietly watching it unfold. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only peace, a rare, fleeting kind of peace that came from doing what needed to be done. Then he felt it, a presence beside him. He turned. Tasha. For a long moment, neither said a word. The world around them faded, just two siblings standing in the aftermath of years of silence, pride, hurt, and misunderstanding. Tasha broke first. "You should have told me," she whispered. Her voice cracked slightly, the strong, polished lawyer mask slipping. Darnell gave a soft chuckle. "Would you have believed me?" She shook her head, blinking back tears. "Probably not." They stood there, two grown people suddenly feeling very small, very vulnerable. Tasha folded her arms tightly across her chest. "I spent years thinking you gave up, thinking you just settled." Her voice faltered. "I didn't see it. I didn't see you." Darnell smiled sadly. "Most people didn't." She looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "But you didn't just survive. You built something. You made them look up." Darnell shrugged lightly. "I didn't do it for them." "Then why?" He paused, voice low, steady. "For her." He didn't need to say the name. They both knew who. Tasha wiped at her eyes, embarrassed. "You honored her better than I ever could." Darnell shook his head. "We both honored her, just differently." A beat of silence. The music from the ballroom had faded into soft background hums, muted jazz, slow and sorrowful. Tasha took a shaky breath. "So what now?" "You're rich beyond anything we ever imagined. You could live anywhere, do anything." Darnell smiled, a real one this time. "I have plans." "What kind of plans?" He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn envelope, the same one his mother had written before she passed. He opened it, for the first time, right there, in front of her. Inside was a single piece of paper, yellowed, faded, in his mother's familiar looping script. "Remember, baby, true wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you give away." Darnell folded the paper carefully, tucking it back into his pocket. "I'm not here to hoard wealth. I'm here to build legacies." Tasha watched him, really watched him, and for the first time in years, she saw not the brother she pitied, but the man she admired. "What do you need me to do?" she asked softly. It wasn't just an offer. It was a surrender, a partnership, a promise. Darnell smiled. "There's a bookstore I'm opening, where kids can read, dream, and believe again. It's called Jones Legacy and Light." "Named after her?" He nodded. "And after every dream that wasn't allowed to bloom." He handed her a business card. Simple, elegant, Margaret Legacy Foundation, General Counsel, Tasha Jones, Askew. Her hand trembled slightly as she took it. "You trust me?" He chuckled. "Always have. I just needed you to see me first." They embraced, a real embrace this time. Not rushed, not obligatory. An embrace that mended years of distance. From across the room, Luis watched them, smiling, hopeful. Because tonight wasn't just about an empire changing hands. It was about a family, broken but healing. It was about dignity being restored. It was about planting seeds for a future most of the people in that ballroom would never understand. But that didn't matter, because the ones who mattered did. 6 months later. A warm spring breeze swept down 79th Street, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass, roasted peanuts from the corner vendor, and the faint perfume of lilacs planted in sidewalk beds. The city looked the same from the outside. Same cracked sidewalks, same stubborn traffic, same leaning street signs. But something was different here now. The old abandoned storefront, once forgotten, once rotting, was reborn. Above the wide glass windows, a new sign gleamed under the sun. Jones Legacy and Light Bookstore. And below that, smaller but no less proud, where every story matters. Inside, the air smelled of oak shelves, crisp new pages, and 1,000 untold dreams waiting to be found. Children darted between colorful displays. Teens lounged in cozy beanbags, thumbing through comic books and poetry collections. Parents flipped through self-help guides and financial literacy handbooks. At the checkout counter, Luis stood proudly in a pressed button-up shirt. His name tag read, Luis Herrera, Assistant Manager. He grinned every time he scanned a book. This wasn't just a bookstore. It was a sanctuary, a lighthouse in a world that too often forgot how important it was to dream. Near the front window, a woman in a navy blue dress, Miss Alberta from the Literacy Center, sat reading aloud to a circle of wide-eyed second graders. Her voice rose and fell like a song as she brought the characters to life. Every few sentences, a child's laughter broke the air like church bells. And near the entrance, under a framed photo of Margaret Jones, smiling, arms open as if welcoming everyone in, stood Darnell. No tuxedo, no designer suit, just jeans, a simple collared shirt, and a contented look that made him seem taller, broader, lighter. Tasha arrived carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. She handed one to him without a word. They stood side by side, watching it all. A living dream, a legacy she finally understood. "You did good," Tasha said softly. Darnell smiled, eyes misty. "We did good." Behind them, a small stage had been set up near the back of the store. Nothing fancy, just a microphone and a wooden stool. Luis tapped the mic. "Hey everyone, thanks for coming out. Mr. Jones asked me to kick things off tonight. First off, this bookstore ain't just about selling books. It's about telling stories, especially the ones the world tries to forget." Applause broke out, real, heartfelt. Luis beamed. Then, Darnell stepped onto the stage. He waited for the room to quiet, his presence alone commanding attention. He didn't need a grand introduction anymore. Everyone who mattered already knew who he was. "Tonight," Darnell said, "we open the doors to more than just a bookstore. We open the doors to every kid who was told they weren't enough, to every dreamer who thought they had to shrink to fit inside somebody else's small idea of success." He paused, scanning the crowd. Mothers, fathers, students, dreamers, fighters. This place is for you, for us, for every story that almost got lost because no one was willing to listen. He pointed to the portrait of his mother above the door. "This is her dream, and now it's yours too." Tasha wiped her eyes. She wasn't the only one. Miss Alberta clapped her hands, leading the room into a standing ovation. Darnell stepped down into the crowd as people surged forward. Old neighbors, former students, young parents, Luis's family. Each person shook his hand, hugged him, thanked him, not for charity, but for belief, for creating a place where dignity wasn't earned. It was given freely. Later that night, after the crowd had thinned and the bookstore hummed with the soft turning of pages, Darnell sat at a table by the window. Tasha sat across from him, sipping her coffee. Luis swept the floors with the same care Darnell once did at Grantwell and Pierce, but this time with pride. The neon open sign buzzed softly above them. Outside, the city glittered, alive, hopeful. Tasha leaned back in her chair. "You know," she said, "you could have disappeared after you won. Bought an island, built a mansion, never looked back." Darnell smiled. "Some people build walls with their blessings. I wanted to build doors." He pulled out a small black notebook from his jacket pocket, the same one he used to scribble dreams in, back when dreams felt far away. He slid it across the table. Tasha flipped it open. Inside were dozens of pages, plans, sketches, goals, new literacy centers in every major city, college scholarships for first-generation students, financial literacy courses for underserved communities, grants for Black entrepreneurs and minority-owned businesses. It wasn't about money. It was about multiplying hope. "Mama always said," Darnell said, "it's not enough to make it out. You got to reach back and pull somebody else through." Tasha smiled. "Then let's get to work." They clinked coffee cups, a quiet toast, a sacred promise. As the night deepened, Darnell looked around his bookstore one last time. He didn't need marble floors, didn't need corner offices or private jets. Here, in the crackle of pages, in the laughter of children, in the steady hum of a community healing itself. Here, he was wealthier than any man in any tower he had ever cleaned. Because true wealth isn't counted in dollars, it's counted in legacies. And Darnell Jones, he wasn't just rich, he was unforgettable. Respect isn't about wealth. It isn't about status. It's about how you treat those you think you'll never need. Because one day, the man you ignored might just own the ground you're standing on. Darnell Jones was the man they ignored, mocked, and overlooked, until the day he quietly won a $2 billion jackpot and used it not for revenge, but to build a legacy they could never match. This is a story of redemption, dignity, and the quiet power of rising above. What would you do if you won $2 billion? Comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful tales about justice, redemption, and legacy. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that inspires and uplifts.